Hey there, I'm Lori, and this is my sewing room. Today I'm going to give you a little tour of my sewing room in anticipation of some changes that I'm planning to make, some little improvements that I think I want to make. This sewing room is one of the spare bedrooms in our house, and it's been rearranged many times as I try to figure out what's going to work for me. And I think I've come pretty close to the configuration that I like. And so now the kind of changes that I'm going to be making are just little fine-tuning kind of things to improve the look and to improve a little bit of the efficiency of how it's organized. I love watching YouTube videos on other people's sewing rooms. I watch them a lot because I always gain some ideas that I can use here in my own space. So, and I've gotten some really good ideas. So let me just switch this around and I'll show you around the room. Okay, so this is what it looks like when you first walk in the door, and I am totally new at videoing things, and so I apologize for the awkwardness of the camera movement. I'll do my best, but this is what you find when you first walk in the door. And let me just explain. I'm going to start here with where my sewing machine sits, and I am primarily a quilter, although I do also make some of my own clothes. But I have my sewing machine station set up in this L shape, and that is the shape that a lot of quilters prefer, because when you're working on a big quilt, you need that left side table to hold the bulk of the weight of the quilt as you're maneuvering the other part around underneath the sewing machine. So this is where I keep the things that I need most often as I am working on a quilt. So underneath the quilt there, you'll see I've got my cutting mat with a small ironing pad and then a smaller rotating cutting board on top of that cutting mat. And then you'll notice that I've got a lot of my tools up on the wall there. Now, it probably looks like a bit of a reach, and for some people that might not be very convenient, but I have a fairly long reach, so it works really well for me. And I have other tools that I don't use as often, and these are the ones that I use the most often, so I like to keep them close at hand. And then in the corner there I have some of my, the notebook has some of my previously used patterns, and also the manuals for my sewing machines. I do have a spare that sits below the table, so that space underneath the table has the embroidery module for my sewing machine, as well as the other spare sewing machine. And then that little drawer unit has again the rest of the type of tools that I use fairly frequently and that I want close at hand. And then I just keep a box underneath to catch my little scraps as I am doing my piecing and all those little pieces of leftover fabric that go into the bins there. And as you can see, I've got one bin full and I've started a second. So eventually I will need to do something with those, but that's, perhaps for another day. So then to the left, you can see I have this fairly long counter that I created for myself using kitchen cabinets that I bought from the Habitat store here in town. And they're not mounted in any way, so they can be moved around. And in fact, they have been moved around a number of times as I try out different configurations to see what I'm going to like best. And those mats on top are old mats that are not in great shape anymore, but they're not totally useless. So I've rotated them out to there, and then my newer mat sits on my other cutting table. Now, there are some things about this that I'm going to want to improve, and let me start with the countertop. So the countertop is made of a cabinet grade plywood, and you'll see that there's a gap there. There's a piece there that is separate. And the reason is because the room has gone through so many different configurations, and my counter had to adapt to that. And this last arrangement, I didn't have a piece long enough, and so I just pieced it together. And for now it works, but that's going to be one of the things that I'm going to change. The other thing that I want to fix about this is that when I painted the counter, I just used a regular latex paint, and it sticks. You can hear, even after all this time, things that I put onto it, they stick. And so I read up, and I realize now that I used the wrong kind of paint. So what I'm going to eventually do is get a new piece of plywood that fits the whole length, paint it with the correct kind of paint, and then I'm just going to leave this configuration, I think, pretty much as it is. You may notice this lamp that I have here, the swing arm lamp. I actually got this when I was doing some jewelry making for a while. I don't do that much anymore, but I really like this lamp because it's got a magnifying glass in the top, and that's very handy when I'm doing something very close up, like having to unpick really tiny stitches. The only thing about these lamps is that they always come with an itty bitty little clamp that is totally useless. And so, thanks to a suggestion by my sister, I took these two pieces of wood and glued them together, drilled a hole here in the center big enough to hold the lamp, and then I just clamped them down. And that has worked for me for a really long time. But I'm starting to kind of not like the space that the clamps take up, so I think I'm actually going to glue that down and affix it in a more permanent way to that countertop, so that I can get those clamps out of the way and make better use of that space. And as you can see, my cutting table is actually one of those folding office tables. And it's worked fine. And then the table my sewing machine sits on is an old kitchen table that I bought off of Facebook Marketplace. And this is something else that I think I'm going to change because I want a more uniform look. I want the counter to continue from there all the way down to the wall. Although I like the height of the table, I think what I'm going to do is take another piece, I'm sorry about shaking the camera, I want to get another piece of plywood and create a kind of built-in and mount it actually to the wall with some supports. And so that's, and I'll paint it the same as the counter over here, and so that it'll have a more uniform appearance. Now the shelf above I added fairly recently because I wanted to clear up the counter space. I wanted to have fewer things taking up that room, and I might also do something with that little shelving unit there. That holds all of my thread, all of my most frequently used thread. I don't have a huge supply of thread. And then on top of that, I have some of my scrap collections cut into 5-inch squares, and that's part of me trying to create a scrap system similar to what Lori Holt showed in one of her videos. But one of the benefits of the shelving unit is I was able to affix that long light at the top, which I really like. In fact, I like it so much that I think I'm going to need to add another one on the other side. And then I have my little decorations and stuff. This is kind of, my sewing room is kind of where I put decorative items that I don't have a place for anywhere else in the house, but I like. I don't want to get rid of them. And so I just put them in my sewing room until I maybe figure out another place to put them. And then I made those little push pin boards that are up underneath the shelf to hold, you know, little things that I might need. And there's not really a real plan to that. My travel iron there functions as my ironing station for when I'm doing piecing. Because I don't want to have to keep getting up from the machine. I can do my cutting and my sewing and my pressing of my seams here in this same location. I just move this aside and I've got a little ironing pad, and then that little travel iron. It's funny because that travel iron is really old, but it still gets really hot, which is unusual for travel irons. Back in the day when I used to do more traveling, hotels didn't provide irons in the hotels the way they do now. I mean, you had to ask for it. And so I just always took my own little iron along. And then, of course, I did, years later, I don't do as much traveling, and now hotels provide irons without you asking. And so it just sort of sat in a closet collecting dust, and then I realized how useful it would be here in my sewing room. So now the drawer units, like I said, I got those from Habitat. I had to put them together, but it made them pretty reasonably priced. And the way I've organized these is that this unit here has my fat quarters. The bottom two drawers have the fat quarters, and then the top drawer has other tools that are not quite as often used as the one in the gray drawer unit, but they're things that I do still want to have access to fairly easily. So that's, that's where I keep those. Now, these 4 lower drawers hold my yardage fabric. I have them wrapped around those little cardboards that you get. You can buy them online. They're advertised as for comic books to keep them from, slouching down on the shelf. And so that's got all my yardage. I don't have enough of it that I need to organize it by color or, brand or anything like that. I just put it in there however for right now. And then the last unit, those 2 drawers have my other notions that I don't use very often for other types of sewing. It's got ribbons and zippers and bias tape and my little vacuum attachment for cleaning out my machine and some of my patterns. So I started with the ones closest to my sewing station, the fabrics that I use the most often, and then worked my way back with things that I use less often. That was my thinking. Now those top drawers that are shallow have gone through a lot of changes as well, because I didn't really know what to do with them. It's real easy to use them to just sort of collect junk. Right now I'm using them as a way to try to organize. I'm trying to build for myself a little scrap system, like I said, similar to what Lori Holt showed in her video. And of course I don't have a lot in there yet because I have a lot of scraps that I still need to cut up, but that's the thinking behind it right now. And I don't have any plan to change that. My plan really is just to kind of build it up a bit more. Yeah, and so that little plastic bin has the next project that I want to begin working on. I'm one of those people that only works on one thing at a time, and right now that is this quilt right here that I have been slowly working on, because quilting on a domestic machine takes a little bit of muscle strength. I can only quilt for short segments of time, then I take a break, and then I quilt some more and take a break. All right, so then let me move this, and because this counter is higher, I did get myself a taller stool. I don't use it that often, but if I need to, I can push it up to this, and it creates another little workspace. The mannequin, I call her Mrs. Danvers. It's actually leftover from a store that either went out of business or changed out their mannequins, and they donated them to a thrift shop, and I got it from a thrift shop. And the dress, that mannequin, by the way, is not my correct size. So whenever I do use it, I either have to pat it out significantly, or I just use bits and pieces of it. I don't necessarily use it the way some dressmakers do. But the dress comes also from a thrift shop. It's a vintage dress. I don't know what era. I'm guessing around 1940s, maybe. I don't know. But so then I have a little station here. I don't know if I should call it a station, but it's my little corner where I can sit when I've got handwork to do. And so this is a comfortable chair that I got secondhand, and my little TV remote. So that's nice to have. Plus also sometimes if I'm working in here, my husband can come in and visit me, so that I get to see him sometimes. And then this is the most recent change that I've just made. For a long time, I just had a regular ironing board, and I was really happy with my ironing board, and I didn't change it. I liked the fact that it had a shelf to hold the iron, and it had a cord minder. But I finally came to the conclusion that the space underneath the ironing board was wasted real estate. So I found this chest of drawers on OfferUp, and I had a really hard time finding one that had the dimensions that I wanted, because it needed to be short enough to fit in that space, but it also needed to be tall enough to function as an ironing board. and it was surprisingly difficult to find something that fit those dimensions. So when I finally did find something, I didn't inspect it very carefully before I agreed to buy it. And as a result, I paid, to be honest, I paid too much for it. Because after I got it home, I realized that there was damage to it that I had to fix. The drawers, the dovetails were coming apart in a couple of places. It's a much older unit than I realized. But it wasn't such a good quality piece that I felt any compunction about painting it. So I did, and I made a video on that, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. But so I like this. I have ordered another cord minder that I can attach to the end of the board there. I just took a piece of plywood and covered it in about 4 layers of batting, and then 2 pieces of fabric. There's a layer of plain white fabric underneath the printed fabric. And then on the underside, I don't think I can show you without making you super dizzy, but on the underside here, I stapled some of that rubbery shelf liner type stuff so that it won't slide around on the top of the dresser. Plus it protects the paint on the top of the dresser, so it gives that some stability. Okay, so now that brings us back around to this point in the room. Now that chest of drawers is one that I've had from childhood, and it has housed all of my batting. Quilters use a lot of batting, and it takes up a lot of room. So the top drawer holds my batting scraps, which I will then reuse by piecing them together for smaller projects like placemats and bags and things like that. And then the lower drawers are for the bigger pieces. But now that I have this new ironing station, everything has been transferred from there into this chest of drawers. So my plan is to move this out and use it in a different place. What that'll do is that will allow me, when I redo these tables with counters, is I'll be able to extend the one that my sewing machine sits on. I'm thinking to about the middle of where the chest of drawers sits now. And for my TV, I like to have a TV in my sewing room because sometimes I like to watch movies while I'm working. I bought a TV stand that I think will allow it to sit on the counter and then keep it at approximately the same height. It'll take me a while to, try that out, so I don't know how that's going to work, but that's the plan. So, yeah, so that's pretty much it. And I'm real pleased with the new ironing station, and I'm looking forward to making a few little improvements. I spend a lot of time in here, well, as much as I can, considering I'm still working. I'm hoping to retire in the not too distant future, but yeah, so I'll post another video when I have made some progress and show you what I've got done. Thanks for watching. Bye.